Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Osher Lifelong Learning at UCSD. It's so nice to see you all here. I'm Mavis Porter. I'm a member of the Curriculum Committee, and today we'd like to, well, you already know that I'd like to introduce Margaret Schoeninger. Did I say it right? I'm not sure. I apologize. Margaret is going to talk, she already said that, on the evolution of the human diet. She's had a wonderful career. She's a distinguished professor emerita of anthropology at UCSD and a co-director of CARTA. Her research centers on primate subsistence strategies based on her archaeological, paleontological, and ethnographic fieldwork projects in North America, Mesoamerica, Pakistan, India, Kenya, and Tanzania. She has had academic positions at UCLA, Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, and the University of Wisconsin. She received her MA from the University of Cincinnati and a PhD from the University of Michigan. I would like to welcome her this morning, and you may take the microphone.
So my interests are on the evolution of human diet and therefore the evolution of humans. Basically, without the former, the latter becomes completely irrelevant. And so in many ways, I've decided to work on the basic portion of human evolution studies, and that's been my career. What really shocked me was that a couple of years ago, I was going through books because I was planning on moving, and I came across my high school annual from 1966. And here we are with me, that is actually a picture of me, in 1966, the year I graduated from high school. And part of the reason I'm showing you this picture is because one of the things I almost wore this morning was a shirtwaist dress. And here I am wearing a shirtwaist dress, and I'm holding a miniature fake human skeleton and saying to one of my co-students, I wonder what they ate. And it's in my high school annual yearbook. I was just absolutely shocked. So I've been interested in diet for a very, very long time. There's another reason I'm probably interested in diet, and that is I was raised Catholic in the South. And if you're a young woman, Catholic in the South, in my period, you did not talk about sex. So I think for all those reasons, I was molded to study the evolution of human diet. Now, the first thing we have to get across is that we are primates. We are members of the order Primates. So when I go to talk about the evolution of diet, I'm going to be comparing with living primates, and then I'm going to go through the fossil record and show you part of my history in terms of field career and also what goes on in terms of the fossil record and how well it matches extant primates, living primates. So the living primates include the lemurs, the tarsiers, there we go, lemur. So these are all prosimians. South American monkeys, Old World monkeys, gibbons, orangutans, gorillas, and chimpanzees, and now humans. So when we look, this is actually gut size, the gut proportions within our relatives. The orangutan is in Southeast Asia and broke off from us probably 10 million years ago at least. So I'm not going to talk much about the orang. Here's the gorilla and the chimpanzee. These are the separations of those that are probably on the order of 5 million years ago. We'll go into this a little bit more later. And then here's a former graduate student of mine, Alyssa Crittenden, and you will hear about her research at the end. The point that I cannot show you right now is that in us, we have very simple stomachs compared to any of the other primates, and also especially compared to the gorillas and the chimpanzees. We have mostly small intestine in the hindgut, where you basically break down fats and proteins. The gorillas have very large stomachs where they're breaking down cellulose. Chimpanzees are somewhere in the middle. So when we go on to diet, we'll be comparing that as well. So when we look across trends across all primates, there's a trend between food and body size. So when we look at primate foods and we look at body size, we have very small primates over here. This is one of the smallest living today, a dwarf lemur, being held in the hand. That's a person's finger, so you can see how small that is. When you look at its diet, it's largely insects, and insects are variable in energy. You've probably seen I was going to say propaganda, sales pitch, all the other things about we should be eating insects. And there's a very strong argument for us eating insects, which has nothing to do with the evolution of human diet. So I won't go into that today. But what you see in insects is they're variable in energy, they're very high in protein, and they're mobile in space, which means they're difficult to catch. And they're variable to digest because they have carapaces that are made out of an indigestible carbohydrate. So you get these small animals can subsist on insects. Large animals cannot subsist on insects. You can't get enough to be able to feed the animal. You've got things like monkeys that have fruit. That's high in energy. It's low in protein, and the energy that it is a very simple sugar. So it's fructose. It's not a complex carbohydrate. The fruit is mobile in time because it only comes seasonally. It is not there year-round. On the whole, fruit is very easy to digest. So it's a good food, but there's very little protein, so you can't subsist just on fruit. So we have leaves. That's another high protein source. The problem with leaves is it's very low in energy, and it's very high in a complex carbohydrate that we're not set up to digest. We don't have the enzymes to digest cellulose. So most primates cannot subsist on almost all leaves, including ourselves. So if you go home and have a salad for lunch, you know it's low in terms of calories, largely because you can't digest it. Most of what's in your salad is not going to be digestible. It just goes on through. It's fiber. So what we have are mostly primates that feed in between this. We have no primates that eat just leaves and insects. You're too small to eat leaves, with some exceptions. Too small to eat leaves if you're going after insects only, and you're too large to go after insects if you're like a gorilla or a chimpanzee. They will eat insects when they can, and we know chimpanzees go after insects, but in terms of a major food, it won't work. This is another way of looking at it. If you look at insectivores, they're all small. We're just looking at primates here. You look at folivores. If you look at a folivore, they're used large, or they're feeding on fruit and leaves. And here you got frugivores that are also eating leaves. If you look at a gorilla, that is a folivore. If you look at frugivores, you've got them in between. Humans and our fossil relatives fall in this size range, and we'll see what they ate, because that's the very interesting subject that I've been trying to figure out, and a lot of people do as well. So food and activity levels. There's also a distribution of food and activity levels. If we look at the chimpanzee over here, you see a lot of fruit and some leaves. You get leaves down here. I've lost my thing again. You have leaves down below. You have some seeds, a little bit of bark, flowers, insects, mammals, because we know they'll take mammals if they can get them, and then miscellaneous. You look at their activity levels, and it's high. If you look at the gorilla, that's in blue, you see leaves a lot. You see some fruit when they can get it. They have seeds, bark, flowers. Let's look at this. This is a gorilla, obviously. Look at the baby. The baby is eating what has to be I mean, if it reminds you of anything, it might be lemongrass. It's not lemongrass, but you know what lemongrass is like, and you know that unless you only get the very small white parts, that is very fibrous. You can't survive on that. But you can also see how slow this is, and also how little interaction there is between the baby and the mother. Okay, let's compare that, if I can. There we go. Okay, this is a chimpanzee. This is a young chimpanzee, and it's trying to get some food there. Now what we have is going in and trying to get insects. You see what this takes in terms of the time and how few that animal is getting. And yet it's so important. If you look also at the front, okay, there's a mother also going after with a baby on her back. And talk about the activity that requires. She is holding herself up at the same time she's holding a baby, and then she's getting insects. The baby clinging there, and there's probably one on her back too, is the only way I could see it. So I've given you an overall pattern of this, but I want to say that when we have exceptions, and we do have exceptions, they require something special. So what we have here, if I can show it, up in here is a lepi-lemur that's too small to be a folivore, but it eats largely leaves. And what it does is it goes into complete torpor. The same, it's not hibernation the way that a bear does, but it goes into torpor where its metabolic rate drops completely, and it can't move, and it goes into these tree holes. You can see down below, there's a tree hole and a man down below. Now, if that animal were still in torpor, that guy could go up with a spear and just spear it because it can't do anything. But what it does then is it also, eliminates fecal material that, like a rabbit, it then re-eats. So what this animal does is it goes into torpor, lowers its metabolic rate so that it can eat something as folivorous as leaves, as difficult to digest as leaves, and it extends its digestive system twice in order to be able to eat those leaves. Now on your left is an ii, which is another prosimian. It's too large to eat insects, but it actually does eat insects, and it does it because it has a long finger, that long skinny finger down below, and that finger moves independent of the other fingers. So unlike us, where we kind of have them all working together, this one works independently, and it uses that finger to tap on bark so that it can lift the bark up and actually get the insects underneath. So it is specialized to eat insects. It also has bat-like ears. They're actually mobile. Our ears are not mobile. Its ears are mobile, and it can rotate them to hear insects. So it's set up completely differently than other primates to be able to do that. I'd argue that there's also a monkey. I had to show this because we had these in our zoo, Duke Langers. When I came and saw my first Duke Langer, excuse me for this, I saw one that looked like the bottom right. And I thought, oh, she's pregnant. You can't see it, but the one on the left shows it. It's a male. And what you're seeing is a monkey that is a folivorous monkey that actually has to sit. He moves very slowly in order to be able to digest leaves. So you see the kinds of adaptations that have to take place to be outside that body-size diet constraint. And it goes across all mammals. It isn't just us. So these monkeys also have multi-chambered stomachs. We have very simple stomachs. This one has a stomach, and I won't say it's like a cow, but it is multi-chambered, and it hosts bacteria. The bacteria ferment the cellulose in the leaves. So to do that, the thing has to sit. And it's not as functional, not as social as we are. But they are beautiful, aren't they? Okay, so this is a picture that I have courtesy of my colleague, Pascal de Gagnon, who is the co-director of CARTA. And he taught a course and asked his students to take a picture of what they ate for breakfast. And if we look at these breakfasts, and I tried the best I could do, there are a couple I could not figure them out, but I tried the best I could to see if they fit the primate diet of what we've just talked about. And some of them do. They're basically fruit, and digestible materials that are not leaves, digestible materials. But most of them are not primate diets. They are a complex carbohydrate that we know of as starch. And some of them, we're supposed to eat fiber, right? Fiber. Our recommended dose is about 25 grams of fiber a day. Well, these people are eating fiber in order to get their 25 grams a day. If you look at some modern hunter-gatherers, if they ate the fiber in the foods they collect, they'd be eating over 125 grams of fiber a day, and that's almost more than a gorilla eats. So we have to think about fiber, what we're supposed to eat, what the recommended doses is, and what's in our diets. But enough of that. I can't go on with that. So this is going to be starch, which is a complex carbohydrate. So we have to figure out what in the fossil record do we see that allows us to go from a basic primate diet? What are our adaptations to be able to do that? Okay, so we are humans as exceptions. Our body size is in the leaf and fruit eating category. We don't eat leaves, and we don't eat leaves and fruit. Humans are not leaf eaters. We eat large quantities, I have a typo, of indigestible fiber. Also, another thing is that humans are extremely social, so that although we eat amounts of high indigestible fiber and complex carbohydrate, we're very social. So we're not like a gorilla, and we're not like the Duke Langer. So we got to figure it all out. And I still don't have the answer, but I give this talk, keep trying to figure it out. So there are major transitions, and I'm going to go through those extremely quickly. The origin of primates, ancestral primate humans, and ancestral primate humans and apes. We go to Homo erectus, and then we go to out of Africa. And that's going to be the very last part. That's going to be very short. So let's look at very early fossil sites. And this is where I did my very first field work when I was in graduate school. And you'll notice that a lot of the fossil sites are in North America. There are no native primates in North America anymore. And we know that because it's too cold to be in North America as a primate. Primates are tropical animals. They're not even subtropical. We also see some in Europe along the same portion, right? And that is because the world was different then. So I want you to imagine a different world. And this is what I find exciting about fossil work. Let's go back into the world of the Eocene, which is 50 to 60 million years ago. And here we've got Eurasia, and it is connected with Greenland, Iceland, all those, and it goes over into North America. So there was actually a passage across. The other thing is, this white up here is not the white of snow that we have now and are quickly losing. This is not the white of snow. There was no snow. There were no ice caps. It was warm. The whole globe was warm. And where the primates were in different areas. So where we saw those primate fossil sites were warm. So let's go on to the primates. So this is the 1979 University of Michigan Field School, and it's in Wyoming. And I'm not in this because by that time I was writing my dissertation, but these are all my compatriots. And this is Phil Gingerich, who was the director of the field site. These are the fossil beds. These are red beds, which means there was oxygen in the atmosphere at the time. It's a period of time when we're switching from coniferous forests to fruit-producing forests. So it's a very transitional part of the globe. We have no dinosaurs left. We have only very early primates. This is the 1976 field school. This over here is me. I'm standing on that side of the vehicle, but I am the one who got us stuck in the mud. I was directed by Phil Gingrich to work with this person, Tom Abdelnour, who was then my husband, to dig the thing out of the mud, which we had to do while the others looked for primates. Now, I want to say, I show this picture in part because everyone's smiling. They aren't mad at me, which was very kind of them, given my problems. Okay, let's look at these early primates. This is a drawing of some of those early primates. So I want you to imagine a world where what you have are ferns, and you have all this greenery, and you've got little primates. The largest ones were marmot-sized. You had primates that were down the size of behold it in your hand. I found teeth of primates that were so small I couldn't see the teeth without a magnifying glass. They're fascinating animals. If you looked up in the trees, and most of these were evergreen, if you looked up in the trees, everything you'd see scampering around on the trees were primates. They were not squirrels. There were no rodents. We're in a world without rodents, and we have these primates. And I think the whole thing's fascinating. So, primate origins. There were two early suggestions about the origin of primates. One, they were small, arboreal, and active on slender branches, and their diet was protein and fat. The second, early primates co-evolved with flowering plants, which they did. And at around 60 million years ago, you could have frugivores. They're fruit and insect eaters. They're small, arboreal, active on slender branches, but their diet is protein and sugar. So rather than focusing on the one living primate we have that eats insects, what we're focusing on is the larger group of primates that actually focus on proteins and sugars, fruits and leaves. So that I go down on the side of this, that it's fruit and leaves. We also have a lot of fossil evidence for it. So what we have here, this was published in 2002, almost 20 years ago, is this primate. It came out of limestone blocks in Wyoming. I was not part of this, but we did see these limestone blocks where you get a whole skeleton of a primate in a limestone block. You chip it, and there it would be. This one came out the same way. We've got a lot of the cranium, a lot of the digestive, the rib cage. We have some of the hand. We got one hand. We got parts of both feet, and we got as I said, the one hand. It's a mouse-sized primate. It has skulls and teeth, postcrania. It does not have three-dimensional vision. Another thing that I don't have time to get into, if you think about it, we have three-dimensional vision, and all primates have three-dimensional vision, which is quite unusual. I have to tell you a quick story. I know I'm going to run late here, but I'm going to have to tell you a quick story. It turns out there was a dwarf goat on Majorca. That dwarf goat actually had three-dimensional vision. It was about that tall. And that's the only non-primate, not non-primate, but most animals do not have three-dimensional, like deer. But this goat had actually rotated around and now was looking forward because it had no predators. So that says something about primates, doesn't it? But that just came out, so I don't have time to go into it. There's a grasping foot with a big toe. It has a nail, just like we do, nails that have soft fingers so that you can feel, instead of a claw where basically you have a pad and it's there for walking. This is what it's described as a drawing, and it's a fruit and insect eater. So it's got, I don't know if you can see the back of its jaw there. It's got a very large front teeth that would be good for biting, but it has a blade-like molar, which allows it to chew insects. Okay, we're going to jump some 14 million years here to the Oligocene. And by the Oligocene, we actually have some ice caps. Primates are moving south into what we now know as the pertropical region. We have one that is 28 to 30 million years old, and it's in Africa. This is the ancestor probably of all Old World monkeys, probably New World, but not clear on about New World primates, but all Old World primates and apes. It's monkey-like with an ape-like head. So it moves like a monkey on all fours, not quadrupedally on knuckle walking. It's on all fours. We call it Egyptopithecus, which means the dawn ape, and also Egyptopithecus because it was found in Egypt. This is their fossil site. So the man who ran this was Elwyn Simons. He told me once that the way they found fossils is they would walk across the sand and look down. Now you're in the heat of a desert. It may have looked like the right-hand side at the time they lived there, but when they're looking for fossils, this is what it looks like. They're walking across, they get sort of heat stroke, and he said he walked along and he picked up something, oh no, another rock, threw it over his hand, and realized it was the skull of a primate. So we were running back and found it, and found this primate. They are in the trees. The thing about them is that they are monkey-like, but their head is ape, like ours. It has spatulate incisors. It has chewing hind teeth. It's not monkey-like in the same way that we think of as Old World monkeys. Okay, now we're going to move to a period of time when lots happens. This is the Miocene. And the Miocene started 20 million years ago. Now, the Miocene, which I always thought was the most boring thing in the world, it turns out is not. It's actually quite fascinating. So we have something in the early Miocene called proconsul. It was named after a living chimpanzee in the London Zoo at the time, Consul. So it was called proconsul. And in the beginning, when they found the skull, they thought it was an ape. But this man, Alan Walker, who was my head when I taught at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, was an amazing paleontologist. And he went back to the museums in Nairobi and discovered that this black that was part of the skull that was originally found actually matched. So this black was the original. He went back to the collections that had been made there in other times and found that they fit onto this thing. And what he discovered is that this thing moved like a monkey, but it was an ape. It had no tail. So I think we have to rethink. You don't go, prosimian, monkey, ape, and then human. You actually have ape-like things that are in here that probably led to humans. And monkeys are a branch. Both New World and Old World are branches off that. It's a very different way of looking at evolution, and also, I think, a different way of looking at diet. So it has a body of a monkey, no tail, head of an ape. So if you can just imagine thinking of a chimpanzee that does not walk on its knuckles, but walks like a monkey, walks flat-handed like a monkey. All right, so in 2001 and 2002, another major find was made, and that was something called Sahelanthropus. So this is an ape that lived in the Sahel. The Sahel, as you know, is just total desert today. This thing obviously didn't live in a desert. Now, in the beginning, it was thought, is this an ape or is it an anthropoid? Is it a higher level? Is it more along the lines to humans? There were two opinions. It's either an early hominid or it's an ape. Characteristics are in between. The enamel is thicker than a chimpanzee. Chimpanzee have thin molar enamel. We have thick molar enamel. It has intermediate. And so it requires something very different from a chimpanzee. So what is it? And I don't think it's even yet settled. I'll talk to Lindsay about this afterwards, but I don't think this is still settled. So what about the eye of the beholder? So let's just look at this. We've got Sahelanthropus down here. We have some other early hominins, as people want to call it. Sahelanthropus, did it give rise to Australopithecus and then on up to what we call the Australopithecines, which I'll get into in a second? Did it give rise instead only to Ardipithecus, which is going to go on into modern humans? And that's a question we have to look at in order to figure out something about our diets and also our paleontological system. Now, we have to switch to a little bit of chemistry. This is the area that I did my work in. And that is, we have to look at the fact that, and this was, I have to say, a plug for UCSD. This was one of the things, the photosynthetic pathways, one of them was discovered here at UCSD. It was by two people, and C4 was also discovered by another person that was outside. But when you look at Sahelanthropus, what you find is that Sahelanthropus was feeding on things like grass, which is very different than what all other primates feed on. If you look at all extant primates, they're feeding on C3. You can see this in the chemistry of the teeth. So you analyze the teeth, you look at the carbon, you can tell what kind of food they're eating, whether it's C3 or C4. And I won't go into the specifics of it, but we'll take that leap of faith that you can actually see that in the chemistry of the teeth. So what we have is, this is a primate diet, leguminous pods, seeds, fruit, berries, nuts. These are grazing fauna, and Sahelanthropus. So I would say that is still just a big enigma of what that thing was. 4.4 million years ago, we're now into the Paleocene. What we have is Ardipithecus. It was found in Ethiopia. This is, it was the Science, it was on the cover of Science in 2009 and was considered the highest science paper of 2009. I think what I want you to notice is that this animal stood upright, just like we do. I also want you to notice that this picture down here, it's got a toe that is prehensile like our finger. So in other words, it could grasp a branch and also stand upright. If you think about chimpanzees and gorillas, they can grasp a branch, but they are not bipedal. They can stand bipedal. They can actually walk a little bit bipedal, but they're walking in a very different way. They're walking in a very strange way. We walk the way Ardipithecus does, and probably not the way a gorilla does. Our family tree, I think, comes from Ardipithecus, and it's over here. If you look at the way this tree branches, all you'd have to do is switch that branch over here, and you'd be thinking that Ardipithecus was leading to this right here, to this lineage here. And I would say we don't know yet. We don't know where we are. So to go back to carbon and carbon-13, when we look at Ardipithecus, we look at, again, the carbon in teeth to try to figure out what the ecology was. And it's this open forest. It's this open forest like this. It's not closed like you see with chimpanzees or gorillas. It's not open like you see with some hunter-gatherers. It's in between. We've got elephants. So when we look at the carbon in teeth, we can tell that we've got these fossil elephant ancestors that are living there. We also have a bunch of other animals that are C4 grays, that are not as many of them. And when we look at Ardipithecus, it's right here with an open woodland where you would get the typical primate foods of legumes, fruits, seeds, nuts, and then so you have them in the woodland. And I think what's happening, what one possibility is that they were either pushed by the ancestors of chimpanzees and gorillas, or they moved into more open areas. Chimpanzees and gorillas live in forests and woodlands or in total forests. These animals were living in between. So we've got that kind of background for them. So our expectations of the ancestral human, it's definitely not that of a knuckle walker. Our ancestors were upright. So there are only a couple ways you can come down from the trees. You can come down from the trees as a quadruped, the way monkeys have. You can come down from the trees as a knuckle walker, the way that both orangutans, chimpanzees, and gorillas have done. Or you can come down from the trees and walk bipedally, which looks like what our ancestors did. They came down and walked bipedally. So we'll go on to Australopithecus anamensis. We've got a whole bunch of that, 3.9 million years ago. That leads off to the Australopithecus group. We have a Paranthropus group. This is followed by Australopithecus anamensis. I'm going to go through these very quickly. Some are found in Ethiopia, some are found in Kenya. Okay, I want to go back to this for just a minute. Near Lake Turkana, because I also did field work there. This is part of our field work. We went with the Harvard, this is while I was at Harvard National Museums of Kenya. We went into the field. This was one of our first camps. We're going into the field into a desert region that is extremely hot. We go into a desert region, but our first place of camping is in the highlands north of Nairobi, and it is freezing at night. So all of us were fully dressed in our camp gear with boots on, everything, because it was so cold. Then we drive into the field. I was in this vehicle here with a colleague of mine, Henry Bunn, and somebody from a truck from our group threw up a stone and it shattered our windshield, which then pushed us a day late because we had to go in and get the windshield repaired. Later, we get here and we have a breakdown of the truck because it's 3 days into the field, so we're camping along the way. There's a breakdown of Oh Rocky Fella, where they had to repair the wheel, and I'm sure that Lindsay knows this stuff too. But this is only on the way to the field. So we have a happy picture of all of us in the field, but this is how we got there. And this is the field when we get there. It's volcanic, which is why we have fossils there. It's volcanic, and it's near Lake Turkana in northern Kenya. At the time, the chemical analyses that we've done show that it was like this. These are actually chimpanzee nests up here. So it's more like where chimpanzees live today, where you have leguminous trees, open woodlands, that kind of thing. So what did our ancestors eat? It looks like they were eating legumes, which are high. The seeds themselves, before they're hard, are very high in protein. We have the footprints from there. We know from the footprints they're walking upright. So we know these ancestors are walking upright. So continued dependence on lipid-rich seeds, nuts, possibly. That's another one that they could have been eating. The microwear has gorilla-fine striae. We have microwear on the teeth. We look at the teeth, striae. They also have baboon-like pits and microflakes, so they're eating hard things. It looks like we're getting a shift to hominid. That's our ancestor, puncture crushing. This is Tiefert and Unger and work that they've done on the evolution of human diet. But this is the kind of environment that they probably lived in. This is, by the way, I just want to show you this. This tree over here is a baobab. So let's think about baobabs when we think. This is actually in Tanzania, where I also did field work. Ardipithecus africanus, we find them in South Africa, and I think that is actually a spur off of the human lineage, but it's what we started with, which has given us, I think, a spurious view of human evolution. Their tooth enamel suggests that they were eating something very unusual for primates, so I'm not going to go into them very much. The Australopithecus were probably also not like us. They have, this is a picture of one, and it has a barrel-shaped chest. So in other words, unlike us, we have a barrel-shaped chest, I'm sorry. Unlike us, it had a cone-shaped chest, which had very narrow upper chest, broad lower chest, very large stomach and large intestine. We don't have that. So this has a cone shape. We have a barrel shape. And so we have a lot different body shape than these things did. I'm not going to go through that because I think we're getting close to time. So we're now moving into humans. One of the other things that I think has confused people is that we look at brain size. You can look at that picture because we only have dots on a line. You can look at that picture in exactly the way they have, which is a strong curve upward. And you can say from that picture that there is selection on brain size. And we've often looked at it that way. Now, a former colleague of mine in the anthropology department, who is Katerina Semendeferi, argued about this. She said the brain size is odd because if you're going to argue that these early things they're not very smart, then why were they carrying around this large brain? It takes so much energy. So I want to suggest that maybe if we look at the actual data points, not dots on a line, not averages, you would get a different picture, and that is a straight line of gradual increase in brain size. That gradual increase in brain size is another model of human evolution, and that is you are not having selection directly on brain size. What you're having is selection on maternal feeding. It turns out that the mother is going to raise as big a fetus as she can because that fetus has a better chance of living. To do that, the mother has to be eating something that is of high energy and high protein. So if you focus on the mother instead of on some brain size directly, you get a very different view of human evolution. You start seeing a gradual increase because you're gradually increasing the ability of the mother to increase her diet in terms of the nutritional aspect of her diet. And that gives you a very different picture of human diet. And I've always liked that argument anyway. Not that I had children, but anybody who has children, it makes sense. You're growing the biggest fetus that you can have. You had a child, Lindsay, so you know this. Homo habilis. We'll start with that. That's the first member of our genus. And the reason I'm showing it with a stone tool is because we find the evidence of tools at a little more than 2.4 million years old in Ethiopia. One of the fossils from that site has a cut mark on it. An animal fossil has a cut mark. So they're doing something. Not that they're hunting, but they could be scavenging. And what is meat? If you've got an animal that is at a certain time of year, it's carrying a lot of fat. You got a lot of fat, you got a lot of protein, you feed the mother. And the mother can raise a larger infant. If we look at Turkana now, which is where I worked, if you look down at Turkana, what you have is something called early Homo erectus at 1.6. What we have here is a transition into modern human body size, modern human body shape, barrel-shaped chest, definitely walking upright, definitely walking with our striding gait. Brain size is going into the modern human brain size at the lower end. And I think what we have is something here that Leslie Ayalo drew for her paper in National Geographic, which is a mother feeding her child the fat from the marrow, using a stone tool to break open that bone in order to eat fat. the fat and the protein, and feeding a larger infant. Wonderworks Cave at 1 million years ago. This is going to be my last point. Wonderworks Cave, we found that evidence of fire as well as broken bone. That's in South Africa. That led to a colleague of mine, Richard Wrangham, when I was at Harvard, who wrote a book called Catching Fire, How Cooking Made Us Human. And this guy has prescient vision, I think. He's just incredible. I don't agree with him on this, but on the other hand, when we look at some modern hunter-gatherers, we see them cooking over fire. But what about the earliest evidence of cooking? That is still elusive. We have butchered artifacts informally and informally cooking 300,000 to 400,000 years ago. We just don't have good evidence. This is from Israel. I went there to look at some Neanderthal sites. And this is actually the River Jordan, a small River Jordan. And this is John Speth. This is Nama Guren Imbar, who took me and showed me around. And there are tools over here in these piles next to the Jordan River, some of the earliest tools in which we have evidence of fire as well. But was it cooking? We don't know. So it's just not that simple. And I have to show this because Lindsay's in the room. We have this other thing, and this is only 250,000 years ago, called Homo naledi. It's found here. We don't know do we know what this thing is, Lindsay? No. No. We still don't know, but it's only 250,000 years ago, and it's small. So it's not that simple. But so let's jump ahead and look at some modern hunter-gatherers. This is me in the field with, this is a guy with his son eating a tuber. This is me in the field with Kobe, and we're looking here. This is me in a pink shirt that he took before I left because he liked my pink shirt. And this is them pounding baobab seeds. They gather a lot of berries. The women come back with berries on their head. We see them digging for tubers, and sometimes those tubers can be like that deep, so it's a lot of energy to dig those tubers. They put them over the fire and heat them very quickly. They also go after honey. The men go after honey. They put the men up because you can't risk a woman going up like this. It's just too dangerous. And he's getting honey, and he brings honey back to the group, and the group eat the honey. And it has larvae in it, which is high in protein, the black stuff. So the nutritional composition, let's just say sugar, you get fat, you get protein. We did the analysis of the diet. I just want to finish by saying we came out of Africa time after time after time. We came out of Africa with foods we could eat, because to move out is dangerous if you're trying to eat plants and you don't know the plants in the new environment. So we took plants with us. We domesticated plants, and we moved out. And our diet now is very different. And I think one of the major questions is still, what is our diet in terms of how we incorporate cereal products? Because only about 10,000 years ago did we incorporate cereal products. So I would conclude by saying that the evolution of human diet, the evolution of humans, which go together, is complicated. I find it absolutely fascinating and still do, and I want to thank you for allowing me to put together a not as polished a lecture as I would have loved to have done. A fossil record with unknown numbers of extinct relatives and unknown in terms of where they fit as relatives. The diet, extant humans are adapted somehow to complex carbohydrates. I didn't even go into the milk story. That's even more recent. Carbohydrates, starch, particularly, Approximately 10,000 years ago. That is so recent in human evolution. So, but now we worry about, do we do a paleo cookbook? Are we going to eat prebiotics? Are we going to eat probiotics? What about our gut microbiome? That's a whole different lecture that I could do on this. I want you to look at this, and basically the picture in the lower right, that's what humans did. You ate to feed yourself because you were starving. We now worry about a paleo diet because we've got lots of food. We can worry about whether we eat dried legumes or not because we have the time. We can dry our legumes. We can boil our legumes. We have the energy to be able to do that. How did we get to this point? And that's still what we don't know. I think a lot of what we think of as humans is from the last 10,000 years ago. So I'll end at that, and I want to thank you for all of this.
Well, I want to thank you. That was really, really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.